Hello everyone and welcome to this afternoon session. Really interesting topic, residence in times of disasters. My name is Arna Haugsdóttir and I'm an associate professor here at the Center for Public Health Sciences at the university. And I'm also a part of the collaboration ongoing the Northwest Center of Excellence. And a few of my colleagues are here with us today and we are all investigating long-term health effects of following natural disasters. So I'm really excited to listen to the two women who are going to present here today. The first one is Renate Grønvold Bugge from Norway, and she is a psychologist, a specialist in clinical psychology and occupation and organization psychology. She has been working within the crisis business since '86. And mostly with leadership and also as a clinician. And she has a lot of publications, but I wanted especially to mention a book she published around 2000 on children in times of crisis. That's right. Welcome, the podium is yours.
Oops, something happened. I thought I had made it so. First of all, thanks a lot for the invitation. I think I have to add that I am replacing my colleague, Atle Dyregrov. Maybe some of you wrote the first program where his name was. And then approximately 2 weeks ago, I got a phone call and it said, "Oh, Renate, can you step in if they're permitted on Iceland?" He has been the leader of Center for Crisis Psychology in Bergen for many, many years and has now left over the directorship to his colleague Unni Heltne. She was also expected to be a participant here at the conference. But they couldn't come because today, for the first time in all those years where Atle has struggled so much to get improvements, they are getting the visit by the health minister of Norway to the center and to present their especially research that's being done on grief and complicated grief, with the support from the Egmont Foundation in Denmark, because Norway has so far had spent very little money for this kind of projects, so we have to get it from Denmark. So you see then it's very, very important that he had to be at home. So he has sent me his presentation, and last night we were sitting together and going through it and adding something, discussing something. So that's why both of our names are on the front page. But I like to introduce myself a little bit more, that you have an idea who is talking. I have been for many years leader of child and youth psychiatry in the southern part of Norway. And my last position in the public system was as director of RBUP, as we say in Norway, the Regional Center for Child and Youth Health for all southern part of Norway. I have been working as a clinician, of course, and working in the child and youth psychiatry, but I have also, since I have been involved in larger crises and accidents, I have been also more and more aware of the necessity of organization, not just the clinical aspect, but how to organize. And I think so far it has been very interesting to follow the presentations, because all the time it has been up in my mind what always seems to be the vulnerable questions in crisis, that's about information, about communication, and about leadership. And not just having the prepared plans for crisis in all kind of sub-plans, but really also to make them link to each other. It doesn't help in a community if everyone has perfect plans. If when the crisis strikes, they don't know how the other plans are working. And we have had some sad examples of that. In my town, in Kristiansand, we had some years ago 2 girls were murdered up in the woods, and the rector at one of the school where one of the girls were pupil, when she contacted the crisis team of town, they didn't know what to do. And she had to take the leadership herself and organize. And then step by step, everyone came on board. But she has mentioned this as an example in the book that you were referring to, how difficult it was as rector at the school, all of a sudden not knowing and realizing that the municipal authorities didn't have the necessary overview either. Now, it's many years ago, so things have improved, but still, it can happen if the plans are not linked to each other. And I feel when talking like this, I'm almost on the boundary to talk about what's now on my heart, talking about organization, because I know it's so important. When things are chaotic and there are crises, it's so important to have frames that are containing the chaos. Because chaos is creating chaos. As you said, it doesn't make sense to get a plan when the crisis is there. Chaos is creating chaos. To have the plans, to have the structure. And the more chaotic, the more important the plans are, and the more important is the predictability. That everyone who is involved, both the rescue personnel, but also those affected, know that it's a minimum of predictability, because knowing a little bit is also opens a possibility for a little bit of coping strategy in spite of chaos. And when saying this, I think I'm talking so much that my throat is dry already. When I have been working with this big crisis, I mentioned from '86, we had a big hotel fire in Kristiansand, Caledonian. At that time, that was the first civic big accident, at least in Europe, where we used the knowledge from crisis, all the research that at that time had been done, especially with the defense forces, about crisis and crisis reactions. And we used those kind of concepts in Caledonian, inviting those bereaved coming to town to see their beloved ones in an open coffin in the church. And there was one family coming with 2 children. I had overall, I was in charge of the psychosocial support system overall, but I also had this special mission, taking care of this family. And I remember when we were sitting in our big dome, the church, and I said to one of the boys, "What are you going to remember from this day?" I mean, the organ was playing, it was very solemn in the church. The coffin of their mother was open. And we had been there, they had put their drawers there, they had put their little toys there. And then the little boy said, "I couldn't recognize Mama. She had such a strange profile." And I was wondering. And late at night, gosh, no one took up this little boy, to hold him so that he really could look at his mother. He was standing like this next to the coffin and seeing her in that perspective. I feel it and I'm sharing it with you. That was the lesson I learned. How important it is when we are working and talking about children to think of children's proportions, children's development, the stage where the children are there. Children are not just children. They are 3 years, they are 5 years, they are 10 years, they are young children. So that's one picture I want to start with. And the other one is, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on, after the terror actions in Norway on the 22nd of July 2011, I was called for as consultant to the Labour Party because that was the main target. It was a political action. And the party secretary, Raymond Johansen, in our first meeting, he said, as a leader in this situation, I don't have the competence. I don't know what to do. And as a leader, I'm obliged to ask for the competence because I have to make a lot of severe decisions that have consequences for the whole nation. It might be right, it might be wrong, but I need to have someone to discuss with. Are you willing to take this role upon you? And I almost feel my heart is bumping like this. I mean, meeting a leader who has that kind of insight. And I think that's part of an association I got when I was listening to the presentations earlier today. How important it is also that we have leaders who can see and be aware of the necessity of working with this topic. That means to get it into plans, to get it into laws, to give it priority, and not just make psychological and social topics kind of left hand. It really, really, really has to come into focus. And I think the meeting with that party secretary and his insight, at least in Norway, it had a very, very great effect. Because all through that time afterwards, we had very, very close working relationship. And being in his position, he was also able to talk with ministers who were in charge, to talk with the government in charge, to get things to work. And in this situation, young people were in focus, at least after Utøya. So that also brings it up, how to use some of that experience into the topic that we are having on today. But I just felt like giving you this little introduction so that I'm not just presenting some overhead and then you don't know who are that person. So when we have been preparing this, I think it's quite important to think that different types of disasters. Usually we are talking about disasters with no warning, like earthquakes, landslides, flash floods, transportation disasters, and mass accidents. In Norway we have had train crash, we have plane crash, we have ships that are having severe situations. We have building collapses, terror events including school shootings, and war and armed conflict. And altogether, we know that harm that is associated with acts of humans have a lot more severe consequences than natural catastrophes. There has been made some research on this. What's happening? I thought I was making it 10 and 10. Yeah, I thought this would do it. I can use this one too. Yeah. There are different results from research. There are different methods and different what kind of what the researchers are looking for, but altogether this seems to be the kind of mainstream that natural disasters, prevalence of post-traumatic stress disorder varies from 5 to 43. I mean, it says something about different methods. And man-made disasters prevalence of PTSD is 30 to 70. So it kind of points out that man-made has more effect. In addition, we know that anxiety and depression and other mental health problems may develop. When we are thinking of bereavement in mass traumas, it is kind of difficult to disentangle effects of loss from other stressors, because connected to trauma is a lot of other things that happen. It might be that the child has survived under extreme danger, where the child has seen others losing their lives or getting severe hurt. They may have lost home and school. They are forced to live in new and stressful environments. Basic necessities may be lacking. And to live with constant reminders, passing by the damaged house, passing by the place where the mother or father was killed. And media exposures may add to reactions, at least in our European countries, when there are lots of media focus. It might be a severe burden on those left. And of course, additional traumas and losses may increase effects on children, especially if they have lost some of their family members. If we think of the importance of disaster, I have to look a little bit again. Something happened. Additional. Yeah. Sorry, I just have to get used to the technique here. It is very important to normalize the situation as quick as possible, and I think I can just underline what we have heard earlier today, how important it is to get the structure around the normal life. Stimulation of social support and cohesion. I was mentioning the hotel fire at that time with these two boys. And I remember I was asking them, do you want them back home in your class to know what has happened? And the eldest one said, I know there are a lot of rumors that Mama has burned, but knowing that by smoke you are not burned, you look like quite natural. And he wanted me to tell his teacher that he could tell the class that Mama looked fine. And the teacher did, and that means that these boys, they knew that the class was prepared when they got back to the class. And they didn't have to get all these questions by their classmates. So that's a part that's important too, that the adult persons who have contact with children in school are telling them, ask us if you have a question. Don't go to those affected, because that's a burden that loads upon them. It's important as helpers, I think, to have this kind of, I don't know if I should call it hope, but it is a potential growth, both in individuals, in families, and in communities, despite of severe crisis. At least we have a possibility to talk about that when thinking of Europe. And then, last but not least, improved systems for future disasters. We have been talking about that now during the morning, but I think it's so important when severe situations have happened to really have a broad evaluation. What went right, what went wrong, where did the communication links broke down, where could we have done things different? Because every preparation has to build on experience. And every new situation will always bring something new, no matter how much we have worked with the past. So this kind of linking together, what to really have an evaluation, and all the time you were talking how to keep alive with all the plans in the different communities, but really use every new experience to work with the plans, that they are updated, because they are never going to be a document for the past. It has to be a document for the future. If we think of mass trauma events, they happen to persons who are belonging into families, they are living in communities, they are living in nations. And nowadays we have a lot of big trauma incidents that are transnational. It's a very different challenge. And that means that all interventions have to have a broad perspective. And the interventions that we are working with have to be tailored both for individuals, groups, and societal needs. I myself have been reflecting quite a lot about what happened after Utøya, where a lot of the families and people living around the lake were involved in the rescue operations. But all the focus was on those affected and families and parents, and for a while those who lived on a camping place close by wasn't in focus. So they ran out of food, and because they were locked up by the police because of investigation. And to me that's a kind of example. I mean, I think it's quite impossible to think of every group, but all the time to have the challenge of broaden the perspective, not just think those who are closest, but who are the next one, thinking of kind of waves around what has happened. And the same thing we can getting the focus into children again. We have seen in the research at the Center for Crisis Psychology about after effects after Utøya. Kari Dyregrov, the wife of Atle Dyregrov, they're working very close together, but Kari is the leader of the research program at the center. They have focused on interviewing friends of those who lost their lives at Utøya. And the results have started to come and some are published. And the tendency seems to be very clear that friends who have lost a close friend have very similar reactions to siblings losing brother or sister. Because in that part of life in young, very often there are almost close relationship often between friends and among inside the family. But friends have been a very forgotten group. They haven't belonged into the hierarchy of grief. There we have talked about family members in different niveaus, but friends are really part of the grief groups around. So we need much more knowledge about grief. We have a much too little base knowledge now. More research on therapy for complicated grief than early intervention. We start to have quite a lot on early intervention and prevention of later reactions by doing appropriate interventions in the close phase after the trauma. But just as one of you in your paper said about this, not just the first weeks, not just the first months, not just the first year, but what is to come. And there we see now, when following up from Utøya, these young people, that many of them still are struggling very much. And what we can see, part of it is that there has also been a lack of support in the support systems, for instance, school. The support systems that young people belong to seem to have a tendency to forget that kind of loss in traumatic events really has its tracks for years to come afterwards if you are not working with a good support system. Because on the other hand, we know that belonging to school, belonging to a peer group, have the identity of going to school is also a coping mechanism. But that means that the systems prepare to support. It doesn't come just by itself. If you think of intervention for children, it's quite important that the public health approach may focus on groups and that should be used. After Utøya, I intend to get back there to an example, because that was the first time in Norway that the public health system really took the responsibility from going from top down. Because when we have listened to the paper today, it has a very much strong emphasis on the responsibility of the municipalities, and no doubt that's important to make plans. But sometimes, maybe when there are catastrophes on a national level, it might be a support for the municipal systems too, that it is a guideline from top down. So in Norway it functioned that the public health system, the health directorate, were in contact with all the fylkesmen, I don't know what you call it, yeah? We have not, yeah, in all the fylken in Norway. They got the message what to do, and they sent it down into the systems, quite down to the municipalities. And it has worked very differently. Some municipalities have taken it and done it, and it has functioned with the contact persons, and others have not been able to get it to work. But I think the main difference might be, I saw in a TV program some times ago, that those municipalities who were proactive, who took the initiative themselves to contact those affected, the affected felt that they got support. And then you had the others who were waiting for those affected to ask for support. And they said, we got the money, but we didn't know how to use the money because no one was asking for support or help. And that's a very, very big difference. And I think working with crisis and reaching out for those involved, especially children and young people, it has to be focused, and it has to be taken initiative from the support systems, and not for the support systems to wait. And in the health system, sorry to say, but it's a very common attitude when you think of people when they need help as patients. You have a set mindset that they have to be protected, and you have to wait till they are ready, and you are not going to intrude over their private comfort zones and all this stuff, therapeutic thinking. But in crisis intervention, that's nonsense. You have just to be there, you have to offer, you have to be very clear in what you can offer, and sometimes you have just to make decisions too and hope that people are following. And mostly they are. Of course, I mean, you are not forcing, but I'm just pinpoint it a little bit. It is important to have focus on, as I said, to make things as normal as possible under the abnormal conditions. But what is also parallel with that important is that kind of integrating what has happened. As I met one youngster said, I try to forget, but I'm not able to forget. Then he will use so much energy to forget that he cannot focus on learning, for instance. But okay, it has happened. It's part of your life. How can you go on with it? And that means sometimes that children may say, I cannot do a single thing because pictures are intruding, thoughts are coming, words are coming, scream is coming, and it's there all the time. Then it will be the challenge to kind of how to integrate it. How is it possible? For instance, set off some time every day. Say, okay, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I sit down and let the thoughts come. Because then you have this kind of psychological mechanism. When you don't use all your energy and denying, you know it's permitted, then it isn't so intruding. It's kind of a way of explaining it. It's important to think of to caring for physiological what is necessary to keep kind of calm, to keep warm. I have an example I like to share with you. Once it was a group of young boys who had went by ferry, and one of their friends had jumped overboard and drowned. And the police were taking care of them when they came ashore, and police called me. And we met at the police station, and the first I told the police, get some food and something to drink. And they said no, but no one will like to eat or drink now because they are so upset. But the police, they've got all the food and ordered from one of the fancy restaurants. And when these boys came and saw all this food, for the first, they were so surprised that the police were caring for them in such a way. But no one wanted to eat anything. But by the night was over, nothing was left, because then they felt taken care of, and they used this food. It's very important, very quickly, to work with information, both within all the different systems, but also to those who are affected. And I think it's sometimes underestimated, the importance of making responsible leaders fronting those who are affected. In my mind, sometimes it makes it more vivid to give some examples. Some years ago we had a plane crash in Norway where 55 people lost their lives, and one of the big shipping companies, Wilhelmsen, lost 50 of their people. And I was working very close with the concerned director. And we were going to have information gathering. And there were the first time that we really got an overview how many children were involved. By 50 adult people, there were about 85 children. And that was in 88 or 89. And up to that time, children had never been in focus on big accidents. Children are affected almost always. But it was so important. I remember we had a discussion. He said he wanted me to inform and talk to the people who were there. And I said, no, you are the leader of the company. You have to front them. I am a backup person. And I have used the same model in working with sport clubs when there have been accidents and some of the members have been involved, and the sport leader saying, oh, you may talk. I said, no, you are the leader, you are the responsible, you have the symbol of being the leader, and you are the containing person in this situation. Not me coming from outside as a professional. You are inside the system. I'm a support. And I think that's important sometimes, to encourage leaders to go into that position, even if they might expect anger in transport accidents, for instance, when they have lost their people because it has been a kind of damage in the transport system. Of course, the leader also is the symbol of the negative, but the support. Reconnecting families and social networks, that's important. The Kari Dyregrov in her research has pointed out how important it is also for network to know a little bit what is important for them to do to support those who are affected. Sometimes we may forget that. And stimulate family communication. I guess many of you have experienced that too, that after hard crises and big accidents, where people have lost suddenly some of their family members, families might have great problems in communicating. That it may appear splitting, that the children all of a sudden feel they'll lose the connection to the family members, and that the adult family members cannot talk to each other. So to work with families, I think, is an area that we have to look much more into, that we have done so far. And then it is, of course, important to encourage for for activities, both in leisure time and to get connected to school again. But as I said, school are such an important area, and they need to get knowledge. We were talking about the education, getting knowledge. It also may be a help to have a kind of psychological map, a terrain. What are you going into? What can you expect? When we had collective gatherings after Utøya, for those who were bereaved, we used this thinking of just to prepare, because when you are prepared you can cope with reactions and situations, because also children and young people can then say, oh yeah, they told me that I probably will come to have a lot of thoughts, or all of a sudden get flashback of pictures in my head, or problems in concentrating. I know a teenager once told me, oh, Renate, I thought I was going to be crazy, but when you tell me that these are normal reactions, I can see that I'm normal. I mean, that's a kind of coping and manage with the situation to normalize reactions. Children and young people also have a lot of benefit by meeting in groups. Talk to each other, share. And our experience has been that it is important for young people that they can meet with others who have lost a brother or a sister, and not being together with their parents in a group, where they feel that they have to keep their own grief aside because it's more important for mother and father. And I have met young people who say, no one are asking me how I am feeling, but everyone is asking how mother and father are feeling when it is a brother or sister who has died in the family, as if I am not existing. So this having children and young people in focus. The dynamic pattern in the family may also change a bit. That parents are getting overprotective towards their children, or sometimes that they are withdrawing because they are so concerned about the loss they have experienced that they are not able to give any affection to the child who is left. But I'm also thinking of children may get overprotective towards other siblings and even towards mother and father. I remember a girl once said, "You are so afraid of me, Papa. When I am late half an hour, you are so nervous. But what about me when you are working a long time in office and are coming back 2 hours late without telling me?" So this is both ways. I just show you this just to make very clear about the different phases in when we talk about traumas. And the main message with this is really that therapeutic intervention has nothing to do as an intermediate intervention. Therapeutic intervention is justified when it over time is clear that functions are diminishing or not coming back again, like being able to concentrate, going to school, that the youngster is isolating and withdraw from other friends. But therapeutic intervention has nothing to do in the acute phase. So, what should we emphasize talking about grief in children? Support of parents, and the younger the children are, the more important is the support of the parents. And to work with the trauma, that the child gets kind of connected and understanding what has happened. It has nothing to do about getting meaning to what has happened, but to get the links, to get the cohesion about what has happened. Because it is first when the trauma gets into a context that it is possible for the child to go close into the loss and the grief. So really to put it into other words, the child is not able to go into the grief and be aware of the loss before it has gotten support and help to get through the anxiety and frightening and have worked with the trauma as an event. And then you have this separation anxiety and existential aspects, and the older the child are, of course, the more it thinks into the future and has existential questions. When he has died, then you can die. Do I have hope for my life? I am going to die. And often we can hear about young people about this distress about thinking of the future. And sometimes we know and see that young people start with risk behavior when they have experienced sudden loss in their lives. And maybe that has a kind of link that the boundary is broken somehow between life and death, and that has to be restored and give hope. If you just briefly go into Utøya, just to give you an example. There were 69 people were killed. Altogether 495 survived, and of these 68 were injured and 32 quite serious. The killing happened unexpectedly and were carried out in an extremely brutal manner. The contrast between the peaceful, safe and good place Utøya Island represented and the gruesome events that took place there were incomprehensible. The killings gave rise to fantasies and intrusive thoughts about how their loved ones suffered. The perpetrators showed no empathy. For a year there were daily reminders of the killings, and the strong stories from survivors added to the strains. Several, if not all, murders could have been prevented, that of course added to a lot of sad, severe and angry thoughts. We had psychological intervention following the mass shooting in Norway by collective gatherings. We had 4 altogether. And we prepared also return to the island about 1 month afterwards, both for those who had survived and for aftermath. And we had support, and the last collective gathering we had after the trial in 2012, and then we had a new meeting in 2013. I'm showing you this picture from Utøya because we prepared by going out and taking pictures and put them on the kai and in the hotel lobby to give the opportunity for those who were going back to prepare what the island looked like now. What we noticed was that all those survivors, they ran to the pictures and looked at the pictures because they could tell their families, I hid it there, I ran there, my friend was there, that they really could use these pictures. And it had something to do with the fright that they had inside themselves when running from the island, and at that terrible day, they had this fright still inside. And by using the picture, it was kind of working through that experience before they went out to the island. What we realized was that those who came had lost their beloved ones. They were not interested in the pictures at all. They were just focusing, getting over to the island, getting to the sites where it had happened. They had no relation to these pictures. That's a lesson learned. That's the first time that we used it, but I think it was quite important. This is a picture from the collective gatherings. This heart is a symbol that was used on the national memorial in Oslo, and we thought it was quite important to use the same symbol as a continuity through the other gatherings too, that it was linked together and not fragmented. And we had 69 white roses. At Utøya we had one single rose in each vase, 69 vases with one single rose, to make very clear it was 69 persons. But on the collective gatherings we put it together like this. What we were making quite important was to offer a group intervention in addition to local follow-up, to mobilize social support and coping in a group that share the same life situation and recent history, to help integrate the loss and trauma in their future life, to assist in learning to live with their grief for the rest of their lives, to stimulate sharing and coping with difficult thoughts and reactions, and to help in finding new content and meaning in their future life. That was for weekend gatherings that was made in several local areas in Norway. And then we had the weekend gatherings for the bereaved. That was gatherings with a clear structure that I said something about. We had an organizational leadership. We defined it as a temporary organization. I'll say a little bit more about that afterwards. We had quite clear instructions to the professional people who took part in the collective gatherings. And with the topics that we had was recognition, understanding, and normalizing, mobilization of mutual and social support, help to cope, and help to live as best possible with the grief. And the gatherings had progression in teams because it was scattered over 1.5 years, so we could follow the kind of grief process, how it was different from time to time, and because it's no clear pattern for how to grieve, but what may you experience. I just show you this just to give a picture, when I was starting, I'm almost at the end now. When I was starting, I was talking about how important it is to think organization. And when a chaotic situation happens, and a lot of professionals are coming on the scene, it might be chaotic if it isn't a hard structure. And by these collective gatherings, we had about 50 professional people coming from different organizations, like Center for Crisis, Modum Grief Center, Akershus University, and foreign-speaking organization. And it was so important, and I was in charge of this, defining it as a temporary organization, that in this situation, we were working as a team on one topic. We were not representing our different organizations. We were not there doing therapeutic work. We were there to follow the manual and what was prescribed. Team building, team building, team building, and reporting. Every morning we met to hear has something happened last night, during the night, something we should know about, and every night. When all the work had been done, we met again and put in small groups, about 6 and 7 of the professionals, that they could talk to each other about their feelings during the day. I mean, we had no time for debriefing, but that we at least had some time where I myself could be in focus and reflections about the work. And then we pulled this together. So all the time, everyone was a part of a holistic organization that worked through all the gatherings. And there were a lot of feedback on that afterwards, that it had given the professionals confidence in themselves, that it had given them courage to reach out a bit more than they would have done if it hadn't been this kind of structure. So I think we are going to take that with us as a very important experience, to think temporary organization within the crisis situation. And then I show you a couple of pictures from children, from the children's group. Here it says in Norwegian, "Det jeg savner mest det vakre smilet hennes og håret." They were asked to write about the person they had lost. And here she is saying, "I am missing her beautiful smile and her hair." And all the times we were laughing together. I mean, just a personal message about. And here, someone to fight with. That was his loss. And I think by sharing this with you, I also like to kind of share these pictures with you from Oslo, taken those days in 2011. But to me, they have been a symbol of that we have to face the past. Either we are talking about individuals, families, organizations, nations. We have to face the past to be able to face the future. And thank you.